The Battle of France 1940, WWII exposed. France 1940. The wine is still flowing, the baguettes are still warm, but the storm is coming. In just 46 days, one of the world's most powerful armies collapses like a soufflé in a thunderstorm. But how did it happen? Why did Hitler pause his tanks at Dunkirk? What secrets did the British find in a random German staff car that changed everything? And how did a relatively unknown French officer named Charles de Gaulle become the voice of a broken nation? This isn't just a story about battles and borders, it's a tale of betrayal, bravery, and bureaucratic blunders. From the eerie silence before the German offensive to the chaos of collapsing fronts, massacres, and Mussolini's last-minute mountain misadventure, we'll uncover the shocking truth behind the fall of France. Why did some French generals compare Britain to a corpse? What made Hitler think he could negotiate peace while his tanks were still warm? And how did a handful of French troops in the Alps embarrass 22 Italian divisions? This is the Battle of France like you've never seen it, raw, riveting, and real. So grab your helmet, tighten your boots, and prepare to march through one of the most dramatic chapters in World War II history. It's September 1939. Europe is tense like a cat watching a dog sniff its tail. Nazi Germany, under the ever-impatient Adolf Hitler, invades Poland with a military style so fast and furious it makes Vin Diesel look like a Sunday driver. Britain and France, bound by treaty and honor and a healthy dose of dread, declare war on Germany. But instead of unleashing hell, they mostly sip tea and polish rifles. This period earns the nickname the Phony War, because while war was declared, it was about as active as a sloth on vacation. Meanwhile, Hitler is already eyeing France like a kid staring at the last cookie in the jar. He knows his alliance with Stalin is shakier than a Jenga tower in a windstorm, and he's determined to strike before the Western Allies get their act together. On September 27, 1939, Hitler tells his generals he wants to attack France in a month. The generals blink, then they blink again. Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb practically chokes on his schnitzel. The French will not be surprised. Our bloody sacrifice will be great. Translation: this is going to suck. General Franz Halder drafts a cautious plan, essentially a remix of the old Schlieffen plan from WWII. Hitler is unimpressed. This is just the old Schlieffen plan with a strong right wing along the Atlantic coast, he grumbles. One cannot get away with such an operation a second time. Spoiler, he's right. The plan is delayed 29 times. Yes, 29. That's more delays than a budget airline in monsoon season. Hitler grows increasingly obsessed with a bold idea. Send tanks through the Ardennes forest, a region so thick and hilly that Allied planners consider it impassable for armored divisions. It's like trying to drive a Ferrari through a swamp. Enter General Erich von Manstein, who secretly agrees with Hitler's Ardennes obsession. He proposes the Sickle-Schnitt, or sickle-cut plan, a surprise thrust through the Ardennes to cut off Allied forces advancing into Belgium. The Army Command initially dismisses it until fate intervenes. In January 1940, a German plane carrying the original plan crashes in Belgium. Oops. The Allies get a peek, and the Germans are forced to revise. Eventually, on February 24th, the final plan is approved. Army Group B will distract the Allies in the north, while Army Group A punches through the Ardennes, crosses the Meuse at Sedan, and races to the coast at Abbeville. General von Bock is horrified. You're cramming tanks into forest roads as if air power doesn't exist. But Hitler is all in. It's risky, it's bold, and it's exactly the kind of gamble he loved. May 10, 1940. Belgium, that quiet little kingdom famous for waffles and neutrality, suddenly finds itself the main course on Hitler's invasion menu. Belgian troops, realizing they're about to be steamrolled by the German blitzkrieg, begin pulling back faster than a cat from a cucumber. But in the chaos, a few units don't get the retreat order, either due to radio failure, bureaucratic hiccups, or someone misplacing the memo under a stack of croissant wrappers. These stranded Belgian units, armed with grit and a few anti-tank rifles, hold up German tanks for several hours. It's a heroic stand, the kind that deserves a statue and a Netflix miniseries. But Allied commanders, busy navigating roads clogged with refugees, livestock, and the occasional piano on wheels, completely miss the lesson that small, determined units can stall even the mighty Wehrmacht. The Belgians pin their hopes on Fort Ibn Email, a concrete colossus designed to make invading Germans cry. But the Germans, ever the overachievers, land gliders on the roof like it's a surprise birthday party. The Belgian defenders fight valiantly, but by May 11th, the fort falls. The Germans now have a bridgehead, and the Allies have a headache. Further south, the Germans are trying to sneak their tanks through the Ardennes, a forest so dense it makes spaghetti look organized. Bridges are blown, roads are blocked, and traffic jams stretch 250 kilometers behind the front. It's less blitzkrieg and more blitzkrieg. German tank crews spend hours staring at the rear ends of horse-drawn wagons, wondering if this is really the future of warfare. Meanwhile, French commanders finally realize the Ardennes isn't just a scenic picnic spot. It's the main invasion route. Local officers had begged for reinforcements days ago, but Paris was too busy debating existential philosophy. Now, Maurice Gamelin sends 3 divisions south, hoping to plug the breach with duct tape and optimism. On May 12th, the Germans and French clash at Hunut, in one of history's first major tank battles. The Germans field 630 tanks, many of them glorified tin cans like the Panzer I and II, while the French counter with 470, including the formidable Char B1 bis. The Germans win, not because their tanks are better, but because they coordinate like a symphony, while the French play jazz with no sheet music. Farther south, Rommel and Guderian reach the Meuse River. French units facing Guderian simply melt away. One German officer, Oberstleutnant Hermann Black, notes French prisoners blaming England and capitalism for the war. Their morale is so low, you'd need a shovel to find it. On May 13th, German infantry and cavalry cross the Meuse at Dinant and Sedan. The French are stunned. One general, captured and bewildered, mutters, "You are much too fast for us. It's everything." Rumors swirl that the Germans are already behind them, causing panic and desertion. The Luftwaffe pounds French defenses with U-87 Stuka dive bombers, their sirens screaming like banshees. German tanks cross the river on May 14th, but they're battered. Some units are down to quarter strength, running on fumes and borrowed luck. The French prepare a counterattack. If they fail, the best Allied units in Belgium will be cut off. The stakes are sky high, and the tension in London and Paris could be sliced with a bayonet. Back in London, Neville Chamberlain resigns on May 10th, replaced by the bulldog himself, Winston Churchill. In Paris, Paul Renault recalls General Weygand from Syria and appoints Charles de Gaulle as Deputy Minister of Defense. But he also brings in Philippe Pétain, who thinks the war is lost and blames Britain. Renault begs Churchill for 10 fighter squadrons. Churchill wants to help, but the British cabinet only sends 4, worried about defending the homeland. Gamelin, when asked about reserves, shrugs, "I have none." British General Henry Pownall explodes, "My God, how awful to be allied to so temperamental a race." But not all is lost. At the village of Stone, French Captain Pierre Bilout becomes a one-man army. In his Char B1 bis, he destroys 11 Panzer IIIs, 2 Panzer IVs, and 2 anti-tank guns, a feat so outrageous it sounds like a video game cheat code. German commanders hesitate, wondering if they've poked a sleeping bear. On May 20th, the 2nd Panzer Division reaches the sea at Abbeville, slicing through France like a hot knife through camber. French troops are caught off guard, dazed by constant air attacks. Lieutenant Alexander Stahlberg surveys the carnage. The streets were lined with the wreckage of a defeated French army, shot-up vehicles, pierced and burnt-out tanks, abandoned cannon. The sickle cut is complete. The Allies are trapped. France is bleeding. And the world watches in horror as the unthinkable becomes reality. By late May, the German blitzkrieg had carved through France like a hot knife through brie. Over 1 million British and French troops were now trapped north of the Somme River, their backs to the sea, their supply lines severed, and the RAF down a quarter of its strength. It was, as historian Anthony Beevor aptly put it, a never-ending chain of destruction. The Allies, in a panic, scrambled to organize a double counterattack to hit the German flanks. But here's the kicker. No one was quite sure who was in charge of the cut-off forces. It was like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the musicians had wandered off and the conductor was stuck in traffic. On May 21 to 22, the British and French launched a daring counterattack near Arras, deploying the formidable Matilda tanks. slow as molasses, but armored like medieval knights. The Germans, caught off guard, were momentarily rattled. Even Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, reportedly panicked and called in air support like a man ordering pizza during a fire drill 3. But the Germans held firm. The attack lacked coordination, and the Allies had too few forces to exploit their gains. Still, the psychological impact was huge. The German High Command, fearing more counterattacks, began to second-guess their own momentum. Enter von Rundstedt, the cautious German field marshal. He asked Hitler to pause the advance on Dunkirk on May 24th, and Hitler agreed. But here's the twist. Later, Hitler would claim he did it to avoid humiliating Britain in hopes of peace talks. Von Rundstedt, meanwhile, would say Hitler gave the order, a lie. Rundstedt gave the order himself, but told his subordinates it came from Hitler, so they'd obey without question 3. Why the pause? Rundstedt feared a counterattack from Dunkirk, the need for infantry to catch up, tank-unfriendly terrain near Dunkirk, the importance of securing Arras first, and most importantly, he believed a speedy evacuation was impossible. The Germans had already lost 600 tanks, and they figured the Luftwaffe and artillery could finish off the trapped Allies while the Fourth Army mopped up. After the miracle at Dunkirk, the Germans turned their gaze southward like a cat spotting a wounded mouse. The front line now stretched along the Somme and Aisne rivers, and the Germans already had their claws sunk into several bridgeheads. One particularly nasty thorn was the Abbeville bridgehead, threatening the ports that the 2nd BEF, British Expeditionary Force, desperately needed for supplies. Enter Winston Churchill, who, in a moment of either bold defiance or theatrical optimism, sent 300,000 fresh British troops to France. His reasoning? To give the French the feeling they weren't alone. General Alan Brooke, however, was not buying the sentimentality. He quipped, "It's impossible to give a corpse any kind of feeling, and the French army is in fact dead." But lo and behold, the corpse twitched. On May 27th, the French 7th Army, including a young and ambitious Charles de Gaulle, launched a counterattack on the Abbeville bridgehead. The B-1 bis tanks, France's armored behemoths, caused some German units to panic. Imagine a rhinoceros charging a picnic. But the Germans had a trick up their sleeve. The 88mm anti-aircraft guns used in a ground roll turned the French tanks into flaming wrecks. The bridgehead held. Then came Case Red, launched on June 5, a German plan so methodical it could have been drafted by a villain in a Bond film. Army Group B would advance to the Seine, Oise, and Aisne rivers near Paris. Army Groups A and B would strike east of Paris toward Troyes and Saint-Dizier. Army Group C would break the Maginot Line at Saarbrücken, then cross the Rhine at Colmar. The Germans now had twice as many divisions as the Allies. French General Weygand, channeling his inner Spartan, called on troops to defend to the death and introduced the Harrison tactic. Fortified villages and forests designed for all-round defense. Think medieval castles with machine guns. At first it worked. Luftwaffe General von Richthofen wrote, "What looked this morning like a success turned out to be nothing. The French are hard and tough. They've fortified all villages." Tagebuch Richthofen. But the Germans adapted. Their tanks surged ahead, leaving infantry behind, and the French couldn't hold every village forever. As the Germans pushed south, the fighting grew brutal. On June 5-6, French troops obeyed Weygand's call and fought to the death. But darker shadows loomed. SS and Mack troops murdered over 3,000 French African colonial soldiers, along with nearly 200 British and French POWs, and committed massacres of civilians at Vingt and Oignies. One German officer, in a chilling moment of racist arrogance, told a French counterpart, "An inferior race does not deserve to fight such a civilizing race as the German race." Baguettes 457. On June 6, the Germans broke through at Chemin de Dam, crossed the Aisne and Somme, and outflanked Allied positions by nightfall. General Hermann Hoth's panzers reached Forges-les-Eaux, splitting the French 10th Army. Hoth wanted to press on to Rouen, but his superiors hesitated. Meanwhile, Rommel, ever the maverick, ordered his 7th Division to race to the Seine without waiting for permission. The French blew the Rouen bridges just in time, but morale was crumbling. Even French armored units avoided combat. One German report noted, The regiment met several lone enemy tanks, which retreated as soon as fired upon. Some crews left their vehicles without defending themselves. Brichter 1 Cavalry Division. On June 9th, the second phase of Case Red began. Some French units fought valiantly, but others were in disarray. A staff officer described the army as a stunned and haggard herd. Disoriented, they don't know what's happening to them. Krembril 294. Soon, the Germans broke through everywhere. Guderian's panzers raced south from the Aisne. Manstein's infantry crossed the Seine. The Ninth Army reached the Marne. The British withdrew 200,000 men of the 2nd BEF. Wagon declared the war lost. But Renault, ever defiant, retorted, "You are taking Hitler for Wilhelm I, but Hitler is Genghis Khan." Jackson 1-3. On June 14th, the Germans entered Paris. Verdun fell on the 16th. The Germans reached the Loire and the Swiss border. The French army was shattered. On June 10th, Italy declared war. Norway surrendered. By June 16th, most French ministers wanted an armistice. Pétain threatened to resign unless Renault asked for peace. Renault begged Roosevelt for help. He got sympathy, not soldiers. London proposed a Franco-British union to continue the war. Pétain scoffed, a marriage to a corpse. He feared a communist uprising if the war continued. Renault resigned. Pétain became premier and requested an armistice. On June 18th, Charles de Gaulle, now in England, made a radio broadcast calling on the French to resist. Few heard him that day, but history would. Meanwhile, Mussolini, desperate for a slice of glory, sent 22 Italian divisions into the Alps. They were stopped by just 6 French divisions. To save Italian pride, the Germans joined in, attacking from behind. The fighting lasted until June 24th. On June 25th, the armistice took effect. The Battle of France lasted 46 days. The toll, 2,900 Dutch, 7,500 Belgian, 12,500 British, 59,000 French, 45,000 German, and 1,250 Italian soldiers dead. 30,000 civilians killed. 8 million refugees. 2 million POWs. 30-20 Allied planes lost versus 1,800 German. 3,300 Allied tanks versus 839 German. Why did France fall so fast? Poor coordination, underestimating air power, failure to exploit German mistakes, infighting and collapsing morale. Gamelin blamed cowardice. De Gaulle blamed poor strategy. Pétain blamed spiritual weakness. Marc Bloch blamed the high command. Germany celebrated its blitzkrieg. But the real story? Infantry did most of the fighting, and German mistakes were masked by victory. Before you go, don't forget. If you enjoyed this wild ride through history, full of drama, tanks, betrayals, and last-minute miracles, then make sure to follow us for more gripping stories, subscribe to the channel, and smash that notification bell so you never miss a moment when we drop another tale that'll leave you saying, "Wait, that actually happened?" History isn't just dates and dusty books. It's a battlefield of intrigue, courage, and chaos. And we're here to bring it all to life. See you in the next chapter.